Hello and welcome. I'm Rosie Cook, the Safety Projects Officer here at the Community Safety Partnership. For our event today, we're going to be discussing road safety as well as community speedwatch groups and how you can get involved. I'm joined today by John Morris, the Casualty Reduction Officer at Cambridgeshire Constabulary.
Morning, Rosie.
Good morning, John. And Amanda Large, the Force-Wide Watch Coordination Officer at Cambridgeshire Constabulary.
Good morning, Rosie.
Good morning, Amanda. Nice to meet you.
And
by Matt Staton, the Road Safety Partnership Delivery Manager for the Vision Zero Partnership.
Good morning, Rosie.
Good morning. We've got quite a few questions to get through today, but just as a bit of an intro, while over the years our roads have been getting safer, we do still see someone either killed or seriously injured every 20 minutes in the UK on our roads. And with the lockdown restrictions now easing, more of us are returning to the roads, and it's important more than ever that we're aware of safety road guidance and the steps we all need to take to make our roads safer. If I can start with you, Matt, today, how many people were hurt on the road last year, both in the UK in general and here in the Fenland area?
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, so nationally there were 1,460 fatalities on the roads in the UK in 2020, and with that more than 23,000 were killed or seriously injured, and more than 115,000 reported casualties overall. Across Cambridgeshire, we saw unfortunately 32 people lost their lives on our roads, and 408 were killed or seriously injured, and more than 1,600 reported casualties overall. In Fenland, 5 of those fatalities occurred, and there were a total of 206 casualties on Fenland roads.
Well, that does seem a high number, doesn't it? And can you tell us a bit about Vision Zero, what it is, its aims, and if you feel that they're realistic?
Of course, yeah. So the Vision Zero approach is based on the fact that no human being should be killed or seriously injured as a result of a road collision. And we recognise that as part of that, we've set a really ambitious goal of 0 by 2040 for deaths and severe injuries on our roads. But with that, we've done that because we feel that is the only acceptable number that we should be targeting towards. You know, we've set a 50% reduction target by 2030, but actually to have a target that still includes that number of people, it really isn't appropriate, and therefore we should only be aiming towards 0. And that's the approach that's taken in other transport industries such as air and rail, and really is the kind of international best practice approach in these kind of industries.
And how are partners across Cambridgeshire working to reduce road casualties?
So the partnership operates across a number of partners involving the councils, the emergency services, local charities such as the Road Victims Trust, MAGPAS, and the trauma network within the hospitals. And really the approach focuses on 5 key areas: safe roads, safe vehicles, safe road users, safe speeds, and the post-collision response. And we operate activities across all of those areas. And just to give a couple of highlights, I mean, people are probably aware of the schemes that the council deliver in terms of the engineering and infrastructure measures that get installed, and also around the road safety activities and education activities delivered in school. They may also be aware of the campaigns that support the enforcement activity that's undertaken by the police, so encouraging people not to drink and drive, not to use their mobile phone, to continue to wear a seatbelt. I know John's going to talk a little bit more about some of those probably later on from his expertise. But also, you know, there's within the new Vision Zero approach and the safe systems approach, we're looking at post-collision response, so first aid training for people, schemes such as first person on scene for motorcyclists, and really getting an understanding of the collisions that take place on our road network, so that we can target the resources, the limited resources that all of our partners have in the most appropriate way.
And how does this relate to the local communities and the issues they see every day?
So it's easy to see people and the way some people behave on the roads as part of the problem, and like I said, I think, you know, John from his perspective is going to talk about that later on, so I won't go into that now. But I think it's more important from my perspective to think about how people in our communities are part of the solution. You know, everybody sees the issues in their local community, whether that's speed, parking, and those are the two most regular ones that we receive correspondence about. But actually, this is about often local people who are driving through villages or neighbouring villages, and actually by harnessing that community dislike of that behaviour and harnessing that enthusiasm to do something about it, combining that with the expertise that the officers within the partnership have, to really support communities to tackle those issues in the best way for them, not necessarily just a centralised approach that works best for the organisations involved.
Brilliant, thank you. If I could go to John now. John, could you tell us a bit more about the fatal four and the consequences of these offences, both legally and in terms of the impact on lives that they have?
Yeah, sure. So nationally, it's fair to say that there's four main causes of people either being involved in a collision or becoming seriously injured or killed as a result of that collision. And I can certainly say from my own experience as a road policing or traffic officer, almost without exception, one, if not more, of the following factors is present in all of the fatal crashes that I've attended over years. Yeah. And they are speed, excuse me, and it's not just speeding, it's inappropriate speed. So it's making sure that a vehicle's speed is suited to the conditions, the road, the weather, and even the time of day can be a factor. And of course, never travel above the speed limit. There's distractions, and in particular, we're looking at mobile phones. So using a handheld phone whilst driving, and thinking about it, even a moment's distraction caused by a call or a text could lead to a collision. So for example, a 2-second glance at 60 miles an hour can result in a distance of 50 meters traveled without having your full attention on the road. We've got seatbelts. The government's Think campaign shows us that you're twice as likely to die in a crash if you're not wearing a seatbelt. And then finally, we've got sort of drug driving. So whilst drink driving has become quite socially unaccepted for many years now, there are strict limits concerning the legal level of alcohol that a driver can have in their system. It's worth mentioning that the drug driving legislation is equally as robust, and that can also include prescribed medication if that affects a driver's ability to drive. So currently, only one of these offences would not result in penalty points. So seatbelts is currently just a fine. All of the other offences could result in a fine, sometimes quite a substantial fine, and aggravating factors coming into play can result in prison sentences too. So we heard from Matt, some of the stats of numbers of people getting seriously injured or killed on our roads, sometimes, left with lifelong injuries. I think if we deal with these fatal four aspects appropriately and responsibly, the likelihood of us actually becoming seriously injured or killed can be reduced quite significantly.
Oh, okay, thank you. There's a common preconception that if someone's caught speeding in the UK, they can simply go on a speed awareness course instead of receiving penalty points. Is that correct?
So speeding offences are kind of dealt with on a sliding scale. So yes, a driver could be offered the option of attending an awareness course. That will be their expense, but that would be for a relatively small amount above the speed limit without any other aggravating factors. And they can only actually attend one of those courses in a 3-year period. If they're not eligible for attending a course or elect not to, because it is an option that they would be offered, then the next step up would potentially be 3 penalty points on their driving licence and a £100 fine. But ultimately, if the speed is very excessive, or again, if there are other factors involved, they could be disqualified for a period of time by court for driving for just one speeding offence.
Right, okay. And we often see people trying to avoid the drink driving limits by slightly reducing their intake. How much alcohol can somebody drink and still remain below the legal limit? And what happens to them when they're caught?
Okay, so yeah, there are strict limits regarding how much alcohol a driver or rider is allowed to have in their system. the problem is it's impossible to say how much that actually equates to in drink. It's impossible to say, is this 1 pint, is it 2 pints, is it a glass of wine? Because there's so many factors that impact on how quickly the alcohol is absorbed into the bloodstream. For example, gender, age, weight, and even if any food is being consumed at around about the same time. And also there's many different types of alcoholic drink available now with different strengths, and all these factors together, as I say, just make it impossible to say you can safely have 1, 2, 3 of these drinks and still be below the limit. It's fair to say that any amount of alcohol is going to affect a driver's ability to drive or ride their vehicle. So the sensible option is just not to consume any alcohol at all. And another thing that I'll mention is something called the morning after. Many people will be quite sensible. They'll enjoy themselves. They'll go out for an evening. They'll perhaps get home with public transport, taxi, or have a designated driver, but don't really perhaps think too much about the following day when they're likely to be driving again. And it can take quite some time for our body to process alcohol. And it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility to have a good night, Friday, Saturday night, be up early the following day, maybe to go to work or perhaps to take children to some sporting event, and still be well over the drink drive limit. They will be dealt with in exactly the same way as had they been caught drink driving on the night. That could result in a prison sentence for up to 6 months. It could be an unlimited fine, and it's certainly going to be a ban for a minimum of a year for driving. And you think about the consequences. If you can't drive, you can't get to work, you perhaps then might lose your job. So the knock-on effects are going to be huge, as well as the risk that you're putting yourself and other members of the public to if you do decide to get behind the wheel of a car whilst there's alcohol in your system. And one final thing I mentioned about that, it is actually classed as a criminal offence as well as a driving offence. So you will get a criminal record if you're convicted for drink driving, which is going to have potentially ramifications if you're looking for work, and it certainly could affect your ability to travel to countries abroad such as America.
Right. I mean, I know that the police work quite closely with CGL to look for, getting people support with their drinking problems. When someone's prosecuted for a drink drive offence, are the GPs contacted, just out of interest?
No, they wouldn't normally be, but sometimes the court can offer a driver the option of going on an awareness course, which, if they accept, can help to reduce slightly the ban that they receive. It's not something that will always be offered, but it is. It is something that's out there.
Depending on the offence. Yeah.
Absolutely, and ultimately, we want people to not commit that offence again, and we can give them help and support to prevent them. If they might have a particular issue with drink, then that help is there.
Okay, and like you said, the best option is just not to drink and drive, full stop. Then you haven't got to worry about how many you've had, how many units, and whether that's actually breaking the law. You're keeping yourself safe and other people, don't you? Right.
Absolutely.
Lately, we've heard a lot about the drug driving as well, and the rules around drug driving. Are these different? And how is this drug tested? You mentioned prescription drugs can also contribute to this being affecting their driving too.
Absolutely. So there are, again, strict limits around recreational drugs or illegal drugs being present in someone's body, and those limits are extremely low. The way we test for those is different to drink driving. So drink driving, a driver may be arrested at the roadside, taken to a police station, and then their breath tested for a level of alcohol. With drug driving, again, we can perform a variety of tests at the roadside. So some officers are trained to carry out tests like you might have seen on the TV, the American police, where you might stand on one leg, touch your finger on your nose. It's sort of like a sobriety test. And depending on the results of those, a driver may then be arrested and taken to a police station. And we do have drug wipes as well. So that's just a sample of saliva that can analyse certain drugs at the roadside. But ultimately, a driver would then be taken to the police station and a sample of blood or urine obtained, and that would be analysed at the forensic laboratory for drugs. And if the drugs are found to be present, or in some cases, the byproduct of a drug, which indicates that particular drug was present at the time they were driving. They would then be charged and face a court hearing. The penalties, very similar: banned from driving, extremely heavy fines. So, once again, that drugs can stay in the system for a long time. Those byproducts of drugs can stay in our system for a long time. And as you mentioned, prescribed drugs, if you were to be given some drugs by your GP quite lawfully, but they affect your ability to drive, you could unwittingly then still commit an offence of drug driving, because it's affecting your how your brain's functioning and your ability to drive. So it's just worth checking with your GP, what their advice is. They may say, no, you're absolutely fine, it won't have any effect at all. Most packets will give some guidance, usually along the lines of don't operate heavy machinery. If you see any warnings like that, then certainly don't be tempted to drive at the same time you're taking that medication.
Yeah, so the onus is on the person, isn't it, to make sure that they're acting within the law, even within prescribed medication. Moving back, just touching back to seatbelts. Does a driver receive a fine if any of the passengers aren't wearing a seatbelt?
It very much depends on their age. So if the driver has a child under 14 years of age in the car, then they could be fined up to £500. Right. But over that age, then the onus is on the passenger to ensure they're wearing a seatbelt. I would say morally, though, the driver, regardless of the age of their passengers, still got that moral responsibility to ensure everyone's safety in a vehicle, particularly in the back of the car, because often if a rear seat passenger is not wearing a seatbelt in a collision, they could be thrown forward and not only injure themselves, but potentially injure or kill the person in front of them who's going to be someone they know, a family member, someone they love and care about, and that could potentially be on their conscience then for the rest of their life.
Yeah. So I haven't used a taxi for years. So what about sort of taxis? Do they insist that the passengers wear seatbelts?
I would hope they would do, but if the passenger's not wearing a seatbelt in a taxi, then that's very much down. If they're
down to them. Okay.
Over the age of 14, they would be the ones to receive a fine if they were stopped by the police.
Right, that's worth knowing. One offence that we often hear about these days is driving whilst using a mobile. Can I lose my driving licence if I drive whilst checking my phone?
Yes, you could. So the way you could lose that licence is for someone who's been driving for more than 2 years. Obviously, ordinarily, if you reach 12 penalty points or more on your licence, you could be disqualified. And using a mobile or handheld phone whilst you're driving carries a minimum of 6 points. So if you've already got 6 or more points on your licence, then yes, that one further offence could result in a disqualification. But more importantly, for a younger driver or someone that's only passed their test within the last 2 years, if they were to reach 6 penalty points in that 2-year period, then their licence would be revoked by DVLA. So you get 6 points for being caught using your phone. So you can see that a newly qualified driver for that first offence could then lose their licence. They have to reapply for their provisional licence and retake both their theory and practical exams in order to get their licence back.
So there needs to be that message really needs to strongly get out to the younger drivers, isn't it, or newly qualified drivers. And then another thing and personally in community safety we hear quite a lot about is the e-scooters. While they are considered environmentally friendly, can we use them on the public roads?
Okay, so absolutely. Currently, the law states that privately owned scooters can't be used on roads, footpaths, basically anywhere that the public has access to. They can only be used on private land with the landholder's permission. Now, there are a number of trials underway nationally which do allow for these e-scooters or powered transporters to be used. So Cambridgeshire, there's currently a trial underway in Cambridge City. In order to use those scooters, you have to have some form of UK driving licence and be over 18 years of age, because the legislation currently is such that those scooters fall in a category where you have to have insurance, you have to have a licence, and many of the other things that you would normally need in order to drive a car. So ultimately, if you get caught using a scooter, you can wind up being dealt with the same as if you were driving a car, in so much as the fines for drink driving, for contravening red traffic lights. All those things are offences that you could commit on an e-scooter, the same as you could if you were driving a car. So you some of your viewers or listeners out there might be thinking that they've got children that are perhaps going to school on them, or they're using them to get around locally, without realising actually if they were caught by the police or something happened, that could have an effect on their regular driving licence. If they're an adult, the scooter could be seized, they could get points on the licence, they can get heavily fined. And we've seen, unfortunately, some fatal collisions nationally where people have come off their scooters and suffered quite severe injuries as a result, because some of these unregulated scooters do go incredibly fast.
They do. I tested one myself last week unwittingly, and they had to modify it to turn down the gearing on it because I couldn't control the speed. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, the one
I can see they can be a danger. Sorry, no, I can just see the danger.
I was going to say that,
collision.
Yeah, the ones that are part of the scheme, they work on quite a clever sort of geofencing system. So the speed of the scooter is determined by where you are within Cambridge. So if you're in an area where there's lots of pedestrians, the scooters won't travel particularly fast anyway. And there are limits on the maximum speed they can travel at. And just to answer one of your earlier points, even those scooters that are part of the scheme, it's not lawful to use them on a footpath. So they can't be used on footpaths. You can use them on cycle lanes or roads. Yes,
the cycle lanes is the most, that's what comes to mind as being maybe most appropriate there, doesn't it? Well, thank you, John. You've given us loads of information and lots of information we probably all didn't know about, actually. So thank you, and thank you for your time. Like Amanda, welcome. I'm just going to ask you a few questions now. Thank you for joining us. So what is the Community Speedwatch scheme, Amanda, and how can I become a volunteer?
So it's a scheme that allows trained volunteers in their own communities to address speeding concerns in their own towns and villages where they live. So like Matt mentioned earlier, it's the locals addressing the speeding in their own communities where they live. Basically, they undertake high-vis roadside operations, and it's all about educating the drivers. So it's not enforcement, it's education.
Yeah.
And to get involved,
people who know where the problems are locally. Yeah.
It's very regulated by ourselves. They just can't set up wherever they like. There's obviously guidelines that have to be followed. But if someone wants to set up a scheme, I think we'll put a link on here, of an email address for the Speedwatch scheme, so they can get hold of me, or they can go on the Cambridgeshire Police website and look up Speedwatch and find details on there of how to get hold of me. But I will obviously walk them through how to set up a scheme and help them get up and running, or join a scheme if there's one already going.
Brilliant. And how much time do volunteers need to have? How much free time do they need to have to take part? And do they receive much training? Yeah.
So there's no minimum expectation from us at all, but obviously they do need to set aside enough time to make the scheme viable, because the equipment that's given is quite expensive. They're all trained. Every volunteer receives training from us, whether it's initial training at the beginning or ongoing refresher training. We're always there to do that. Some Speedwatch groups do weekly sessions. Some even do more than one a week. Some groups just do one a month. It's there's no minimum at all. It's it all depends really on the availability of your volunteers and how much time they've actually got to commit to it. But they certainly won't be getting me on their back. They're not doing one every week.
Brilliant. So if someone has a passion about trying to improve this in the local area, they haven't got to sign up for 10 hours a week or anything. No. It's a flexible, but like you say, it's got to be enough of a commitment to kind of make a difference.
I mean, some groups don't operate in the month of August at all because there's too many people away on holiday and they can't get enough. Some say the same for December. There's too many other things going on and they just sort of scrap it for the month and start again in January. So it is very flexible.
Yeah, it seems very good to suit local need too, doesn't it? And what sort of equipment do the volunteers use?
So all volunteers receive the high-vis tabards from us to obviously make sure that they're seen and safe. They also receive a speed indicator device and a warning sign to put out to show the motorists, what's going on. Now, we can supply that equipment to parishes to use, but some parish councils decide to put their hand in their pockets and purchase some equipment themselves. Because that then means they've got their sole use of their equipment, because often we find 2 or 3 villages who are close together, they have to share the equipment. So obviously that sometimes means they can't operate sessions as often as they want to, but it's not that expensive for a village to purchase their own if they want to, but obviously we do supply it for them if it's required.
So how much is the equipment if parishes and villages are looking at this thinking, oh, actually would like to do that?
It's about £2,500 for the speed indicator device, a tripod, a warning sign and some high-vis tabards, around that sort of figure.
Yeah.
So it's not a massive amount.
No, and that's within reach of a lot of growth.
And then they have got that equipment then that they can use as often as they like without worrying about sharing with other local villages.
And do officers still carry out speed checks?
Yes, definitely. Officers from all different departments across the force do still carry out speed checks. So the speed watch basically works alongside police officer enforcement. It's kind of an enhancement. It's not like if you've got a speed watch group, then the police officers don't come and do speed enforcement. It doesn't work.
It's an add to rather than
Definitely.
Instead of.
Yeah.
And I do remember information being fed back to me that some people who are really concerned, unfortunately don't always contact organisations such as Speedwatch and buy speed guns off of eBay, but they're no good, are they? Because they're not calibrated. That evidence can't be used, can it?
No, we definitely don't suggest that that's what people do. If they've got an issue with speeding in their community and they want to do something about it, then contact me and we'll go through the options of
Speedwatch is where you need to go.
Definitely, to keep themselves safe as well. A member of the public standing at the side of the road with a handheld device is really quite confrontational, and we wouldn't want to be putting anybody in that sort of situation.
And potentially dangerous as well.
Definitely.
If you get hit by a car.
That's why the police officers are trained to do that and have all the necessary equipment and safety, and they know what they're doing. It's not something that we would ever advise a member of the public to do.
Brilliant. And do Community Speedwatch schemes keep records of offending vehicles, and are motorists actually prosecuted?
So obviously information is gathered at a roadside session, but that information is literally recorded on a piece of paper and passed after the session to the police. Yeah. So the volunteers at the session, apart from a registration number, a make, a model and a colour of a vehicle, which anybody can gather, they don't receive any other information. Everything else is done by police staff, and the volunteers don't ever see any of that. So they would never see the name and the address of a vehicle. That information isn't shared with them. Records are kept in such that a registration number of a vehicle that's been caught through a Speedwatch session is kept on a computer, and we do have a system of letters for first offence, second offence and third offence. So obviously we do keep that registration number so we can record whether which letter we send and which sort of offence it is. I think there was a second part to your question and it's gone.
Are the motorists actually prosecuted?
So not from Speedwatch, no, it's purely education. It's an educational, it's an educational tool. And there's no prosecution because obviously the volunteers are not trained to do that. Yeah. But
there are a series of warning letters that are sent out, and as you say, that's part of the community education that Speedwatch is all about. So that information isn't shared. Is that information shared with the police about the offending vehicles at all? Or
yes, yeah. And if it's a third offence for someone through a community Speedwatch, they do actually receive a visit from a police officer. then you'll get enough at the door. Yeah.
Right.
So,
I think everyone would be really glad to hear that, because you know, there are repeat offenders in lots of communities. People get complacent, especially in the rural areas. They think there's nobody around, they won't get caught. So you've kind of already answered this, but you know, how will it stop? How do you feel that Community Speedwatch will stop people from speeding?
So like I said, it's education. There's a kind of little bit of a peer pressure thing there. You know, it's people who live in your village who are giving up their time to stop people speeding in the villages that you live in. Yeah. And from the stats that we record of the offenders, unfortunately, we have columns of where the addresses of the offenders, and unfortunately, the people from the actual village is the highest column always. Yeah. So people are speeding in that, so they're moaning about the speeding in their villages, but they're speeding in their own villages. It's
the residents themselves. It is. And actually, it's often the perception it's those people driving through, but that isn't the case then.
Well, not according to the Speedwatch sessions, it isn't. No. And there's also a perception sometimes by the sound of the car that car is speeding, and it's quite interesting when you actually stand at a session and listen, and you think, oh, that one's going to be speeding, but actually it isn't. No. And then one that you don't think will be speeding because of the sound, they are. So sometimes people's perception of speeding, can often change. But obviously, speed, like I've said already, the Speedwatch is just part of a tool. It's a tool for education. It's just one little bit that that's our bit to try and help enforcement as a whole. If we all do our little bit.
The services.
Yeah.
Okay, and if a scheme isn't available in my area, how can I start up a Speedwatch group in my town or village?
So obviously, I've said before, if you get hold, if you're interested, and you don't know whether there is a scheme in your area, if you get hold of me, obviously I'll look that up for you. But to set up a scheme, we have to have 3 volunteers to do a session for safety, for a number of reasons. So you need to find at least 2 other willing volunteers in your community who are willing to do it with you. Yeah. We really normally would suggest you have a pool of about 6 to 10, because then it isn't such a drain on your time. If you've got 9 people willing to do it and you only need 3 per session, if you wanted to do a session a week, you've only got to do every 3rd week. And a session's about an hour. It's not very long, 90 minutes, but they can be very sociable. Sometimes people find they stand there for 2 hours because they're doing lots of this, and and 2 hours have passed. It's really quite sociable, and it's quite a nice thing to get, especially lonely people, or people who find it difficult to strike up conversations. If you join the Speedwatch group, you don't actually have to talk because you've got a job to do. And after doing a couple of sessions, you then might start chatting, and it's a really good way to get everyone in the community, involved. But 3 willing volunteers is a minimum. And that's it really. That's all you need. You contact me and we'll go through the rest.
And is there an age limit, top and bottom, to volunteers? Is there an age you have to be a Speedwatch volunteer?
Over 18, but there's no upper limit.
No upper limit.
No upper limit at all. And we can have everybody. We've got people who are in mobility scooters. We've got people who can't walk without crutches because they can sit on their chair. Everybody can take part. There is a role within Speedwatch for everybody. Even the data processing after the session. So someone who can't actually go out to the roadside and do a session could be the person who sends the return off to the police from home via their computer. And they don't have to have gone out and stood by the side of the road.
Yeah. There's lots of ways to get involved.
It can. Everybody can join in. Everybody can take part.
Well, I'm sure today's session will help promote the scheme, and you've set out really well all the different roles people can play, and it sounds a really inclusive scheme. And along with the work John and Matt are doing, it's quite a nice comprehensive bundle you've got there, haven't you, to try and tackle the problem, to keep our roads safe. So we're coming up to the winter period. It's even more even more important, we have this chat now, this conversation now. Well, I believe that just about wraps it up for today, everyone. So thank you for joining me and giving your time today. The information everyone's provided will be very well received by the Fenland community, so thank you. So just to give you a chance all to say goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone. And thank you to everyone watching at home. If you'd like to see more of what we do here at the Fenland Community Safety Partnership, follow us on Twitter at Fenland CSP, and you can also subscribe to us here on the YouTube channel. Links to all the organisations and information will be in the audio description. And until next time, take care and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.